So it seems that Games Workshop is keeping the good stuff coming with its Warhammer Fest previews. Yesterday we had the main bulk of the Warhammer 40k things, including the massive Leviathan box, but today it looks like we've got a rather intriguing war machine indeed, a newly redone Cerastus Knight Lancer, all in nice shiny plastic, and escaping from Forge World resin. They've showed off the miniature in really quite a nice little cinematic reveal trailer where we get quite a look at the model from a number of different angles, and I'd say for the most part they seem to have remained fairly faithful to the original model once more. Looks like we are really getting one of these long-legged, fast-moving knights in plastic, and likely to be costing far less than what it does currently. The model's got some fun cool details, such as a knight pilot hiding inside him, and as currently should be able to be used for both Imperial Knights and Chaos in Warhammer 40k, as well as in the Horus Heresy as well. Let's talk about the glorious reimagination of the Cerastus Knight Lancer then, and how he's going to be putting that Iron Gauntlet shield and Cerastus Short Lance to the test. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're covering yet another glorious Grimdark preview. This one's really quite a fun one, I think. The fast moving and perhaps one of the most exciting of the Cerastus class knights gets the jump from resin to plastic. Really quite a good news and a big deal to Imperial Knight players, where we don't have all that many individual miniatures to begin with. For those of you who are less familiar with the Forge World Imperial Knight range, basically the army of Imperial Knights hasn't really been around all that long in recent 40k. I think it was around about 10 years ago that Games Workshop released the first Questoris Knight model. At that time you could only arm it as an Errant or a Paladin with the Melter or the Battle Cannon. It perhaps wasn't too long after that the Forge Worlds brought out the Cerastus and Acastus chassis. Forge World do like to make their own individual fancy versions of things, and these were a different interpretation on Imperial Knights, longer legged, a bit more build as a relic model from the days of the Great Crusade as opposed to contemporary 40k where they're a bit rarer, and of course armed with some new and exciting weapons such as the Lancers, Shield and Lance. The Cerastus Knights are very expensive compared with 40k Imperial Knights. Currently a Knight Lancer in Forge World resin would set you back £225, $345 or €275, over double the cost of a current Games Workshop Questoris. They are very slightly taller, but aren't really massively significantly different in models in my opinion. It is just basically paying the Forge World resin tax, a material that's perhaps not as nice to work in the first place. It looks like along with a whole bunch of Forge World vehicles from the Horus Heresy, Games Workshop have decided to reimagine this as a plastic kit. There's clearly big demand for them as people pay the Forge World prices for them, and it probably makes quite a lot of sense just so they can actually manufacture them really quite cheaply and easily, and also offer them at a price that is slightly less eye-watering even by 40k standards. If we're seeing a Knight Lancer being reimagined like this, I think it's almost 100% guarantees that we're going to see the rest. That'll be the Acheron, the Castigator and the Atropos. One of them has a great big flamer and one of them a Gatling cannon, and one's a bit of a knight killer in melee. My guess would be that they'll probably release these as individual kits without the option to build all of them in the same box, though I guess if you did pick up a plastic Cerastus, then I suppose you might be able to get some 3D printed stand-in bits. I do quite like the option to be able to change between knight loadouts, and that would seem like a nice way to be able to do that without buying 4 different models. If you did just want one of these though and really like the Lancer loadout, then I certainly suspect it's going to be a massive great big reduction in price compared with now, more like the region of £105 to £125 I suspect, or around $170 to $200. Could be a little bit north of that I suppose, but certainly seems likely to be around about half the price that Forge World charge for it. The release date of it's not confirmed yet, as with Games Workshop's normal previews I'd usually expect around about 1 to 2 months. Hopefully it won't be too long before we can get our hands on these big plastic guys. Cerastus Knights are all very exciting, but let's focus on this one individually. The Cerastus Knights are slightly taller than their Questoris cousins. They date back to the Age of Strife and are aggressive conquering war machines, maybe a bit more skewed to the assault as opposed to the defensive out of the Imperial Knight variants, often very fast and used for flanking maneuvers. They generally had greater use during the Great Crusade than current 40k, though plenty of relics do exist, and the Knight Lancer individually is a very rapid first strike machine, absolutely hurtles its way towards the enemy and then hits them very hard with the Cerastus Shock Lance, an enormous piston-driven power spear that can take down some of the biggest targets in the galaxy. On the defensive, rather than mounting its ion shield on its carapace, it carries it in a gauntlet, makes it a little bit less flexible if you want to protect the back or the rear of the knight, but extra protection up close if it's grappling with similar peers. The machine spirits of the Knight Lancer are known to be particularly restive and hard to bond with, unless the noble who bonds with it is particularly skilled. They often tend to have a very brief blaze of glory, driven towards acts that might be somewhat rash. Model-wise, the Cerastus Knight chassis generally tend to be considered really quite strong models, Pretty nicely proportioned, and like Imperial Knights, but basically a bit more limber, and perhaps a bit more human-like proportions rather than the slightly squat war machines. He definitely cuts a very imposing silhouette. I really quite like those little pennants that he's got on him, and I quite like the way that you can see the little Imperial Knight pilot on his throne mechanicum within the Knight. Looks like it comes with an Eye of Horus logo if you wanted to dedicate it towards the Dark Gods. I suspect that will probably have an Imperial Knight option counterpart. In 40k, the Imperial Knight Lancer can be fielded both by Chaos and Imperial Knights. The Forge World ones aren't locked one to the other, though I'd say out of the two they do fit in a bit more aesthetically with the Imperials. The 40k Chaos ones tend to have a bit more mutation and warping and spikes going on, though you could certainly do a decent job of converting this without too much effort, I suspect. I strongly suspect that it will be getting 10th edition rules alongside the other current Warhammer 40k Forge World Knights. So far for 10th edition we haven't really had any decent previews as to how Knights might work. I strongly suspect that their toughness characteristics will be going way up if the Orc Stomper's going to have toughness 14. Hopefully with these slightly simplified datasheets they still manage to keep the Imperial Knights interesting. I feel like the 9th edition codexes did really quite well with that, both for the Imperials and for Chaos, to add a bit more synergy and interest to these big models. Another unanswered question of 10th edition so far is how they're going to handle things like Forge World rules. I guess technically this guy won't be Forge World anymore as he'll be plastic. Currently we don't really know whether they're going to just add in the data cards for any Forge World or non-core ranged models into the main sets alongside the codex, or whether they might be treated in a slightly different way, perhaps digital download only, or offered in their own data card pack, one that's aimed at more Imperial armor type things. It's perhaps no major loss that it's losing its 9th edition rules though. I don't think the rules were particularly bad to be honest, kind of interesting. The Cerastus Knights moved a little bit faster and had a couple more wounds, and this guy's Shock Lance was really quite devastating, with a whole bunch of attacks at damage 8. The Shock Lance could fire a small shooting attack to nearby infantry, and the Ion Shield gave it a 4+ invul save in combat, really quite a big deal for Imperial Knights as they usually don't get an invul there. Unfortunately though, just for what it did as a mainly melee mauler, this thing just was fairly overcosted. 440 points was a bit much, say compared with Imperial Knight Gallant, and perhaps its main issue was also that the keywords didn't really work with either the Imperial or Chaos Knight codex. It was locked out of a bunch of really big options like the Noble Court or Demonic Possession upgrades. Maybe this thing being plastic might just be a small hint that it might just be treated a little bit more mainstream than before perhaps. I think it would be nice if they were at least somewhat balanced towards their Questoris rivals. They are quite cool models to see on the table every so often. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the new plastic knightly goodness. What do you make of our new Cerastus Lancer, and would you be tempted to pick one up now they're going to be about half the price as they were before? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. The channel Patreons are who allow me to keep the videos coming quite so regularly, so if you are enjoying a lot, any support there is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a few other advantages as well, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.